You're listening to the Feel Good Astrology podcast with Louisa Munson. To request your personal reading, go to feelgoodastrology.com.
Hey there, welcome to Pluto Through the Houses. This is Louisa Tannermunson from Feel Good Astrology, and in this series I'm going to be sharing with you my thoughts and feelings about what it's like to have Pluto in a particular house in your birth chart, and also what happens when Pluto actually transits, i.e. moves through that particular house. So really to flesh out some of the challenges, some of the opportunities, some of the fears that come up. So it's all about Pluto, and in this episode, which is episode 8, I'm looking at the effect of Pluto through the 8th house. Now, Pluto is a planet that really transforms our experiences, so it'd be good to just have a sense of what Pluto represents fully before I talk more about the 8th house. Essentially, in mythology, it's the god of wealth and power and the underworld. And if you do want to know a much more sort of full picture of the mythology of Pluto, I do urge you to have a listen to my podcast, Pluto in Aquarius. And, you know, there's a little bit of a lengthy description in there. But anyway, Pluto shows us where we seek power and how we seek power. And it's almost like how we seek power at any cost. Because if you remember, I said he's the god of the underworld. And, you know, I mean, a lot of like supremely wealthy and supremely powerful people sometimes have to go into the underworld a little bit to do that. It's like they will seek power at all costs, and they will seek money at all costs. And we need to ask ourselves, you know, when we're looking at powerful and wealthy people, you know, is it that we want wealth at any cost? Most likely not. I've been offered jobs before where I've really felt kind of morally at odds with them, and so I don't do them. And it just so happens that a lot of things that pay really good might not always be completely good for the overall collective. Who knows? So, you know, there's a lot of things to understand about Pluto. And obviously, just by saying that, I'm bringing up this thought of right versus wrong and relative morality, which is kind of interesting because without even meaning to, I start to bring in some of the thoughts of, you know, the house that I'm about to look at without meaning to. So like the 8th house is absolutely concerned with moral relativism. You know, it's got lots about expectations in, it's got a lot about blame, shame, guilt, anger and regret. So yeah, we'll be coming to that in a sec. But anyway, Pluto pinpoints where we might feel weak and vulnerable. And it shows, you know, how we try to safety-proof our life so that we don't fall victim to what we fear is going to happen. So if you think about it, you've probably got some mechanisms in place to protect you from the things that you fear are going to happen. And Pluto is, you could say, is a god of the fears. And in fact, in mythology, Pluto's linked to a couple of other, I don't know if they're brothers, I can't remember, not brothers, but kind of demigods in arms, you know, who work, you know, together. But Pluto does definitely astrologically represent our fears. It shows us where we experience trauma, manipulation, sexual prowess situations, where we have a real imbalance in our need to thrive versus our need to take over. And it also shows us where our enemies are and how they show up exactly. From a spiritual point of view, I think Pluto really shows up to show where we might need to yield to a particular situation. So, you know, for most of us, you know, when we come up against something, it brings out a survival mechanism that, you know, where we'll fight back against this thing that we fear is going to take over us. And we may well have a little bit of false awareness of our own power, our own omnipotence, and we might be a bit arrogant. And I think one of these Pluto transits, or you know, when something is transiting your Pluto, then some of these things can come up, and it's really like a test about our humility. You know, are we actually able to see that sometimes we're in this game because we want the power? And actually, as we let go of the power and we let go of the attachment, often we move forwards quite significantly. I also think that Pluto is very much the like the phoenix that burns itself out completely and then it rises up from its own ashes. There is an element of that, and the sort of composting, the divine composting that goes on with all Pluto themes. Now, here's the thing. The 8th house is traditionally associated with the star sign of Scorpio. And guess who is one of the rulers of Scorpio? It's Pluto. So, the 8th house is really Pluto's domain. Pluto understands all of the issues of the 8th. So, it's no surprise that as I'm, sharing this in an introduction to you, that I'm thinking, crikey, I'm already talking about the 8th because they kind of intertwine. So, I guess what's significant about Pluto is it does show us something deep and painful to learn. And it also teaches us where we can really find freedom. So let's go a little bit further then and start bringing in the themes and the keywords of the 8th. So a lot of people say, or a lot of astrologers say, oh, it's about death and taxes and secrets. I like to think of the 8th house as being a place where our genetic inheritance resides. So all of the DNA stories and secrets, everything that's coded in our DNA, we receive the inheritance from our grandparents, our great-grandparents, our great-great-great-grandparents. It's all passed down, into these bodies of ours. And then we also have these soul pattern connections. I don't know what your idea of the meaning of life is and how you think it all works together. I'm not entirely sure I know exactly how it is. But one of the things I do feel is that each individual person is a person of two parts. We've got our physicality, where we get our actual DNA from, if that's to be true and believed. And I think it is right now, but, I may well change my mind at some point because these are changing times. And the other part of it is that feeling of lightness, that feeling of spirit or soul. And I don't know which word to use. I'm going to say spirit in this moment. It feels like there is an animating force behind it. And it feels like we have something sacred. That's from my own perspective. And so the 8th house, I really feel like it captures all the secrets of your body and also the soul patterns or spirit patterns that you come in. I mean, the 8th house looks at the whole life cycle from birth right through to death. And then the other side, if you believe in reincarnation, that is. Now, it's in opposition to the 2nd house, and the houses work in polarity. So the 2nd house is about our own resource, our own earnings and how we make money, and also how we find resources that we can survive with. I also think astrology often misses out a great part of this. And I've not come across any other astrologers that talk about this. I've never, ever... I sat down with an astrologer and said, do you think like the 2nd house is also about how we value ourselves? Because we are our greatest resource. So I think, it's about how we value ourselves. And then the 8th house is about, and this is what you mainly hear, the 8th house is about other people's earnings. So it's your earnings in the 2nd house. The 8th house is other people's earnings, other people's money from other people. So in a physical way, that could be... their actual earnings, their pensions that you might be able to tap into if you're married. It could be the inheritance that you get from your parents. It's like money that comes in, like bonds and stocks and shares and things like that. If you've got a membership program, it could be all of your customers that are all paying you, so you're not receiving your money from one big company. You're receiving it from many, many people. That's very much an 8th house thing. And other people's money, that also includes tax, which is why people say the 8th house is about tax. But if we go with the same kind of feeling that in the 2nd, it's also about how you value yourself, well, the 8th house also represents how other people value you. Isn't that an interesting twist? And I think that's where blame, shame, guilt and anger really reside in your birth chart. Because without other people, to have an opinion about things. If we didn't have relationships with other people, we would never know that we were disapproved of. We would never know that we were approved of. We wouldn't know if we were lovable or not. We wouldn't know if we were to blame for something or not. We wouldn't know what guilt is. All of these emotions, which really can, in fact, I'm going to change that to really do influence how we believe our world to be and how we behave. They're all based on other people's expectations of what we should and shouldn't do. And so the 8th house, I think, is a place of guilt, real guilt, where people shame you to do something and embarrass you if you don't maintain the secrets that everyone else is privy to. Or, so it's a place where people can control you in quite an insidious way, because all of these control mechanisms are kept quite quiet about. People don't advertise, oh yes, my family runs on guilt, shame, blame and anger, and I'm the perpetrator of it. Nobody says that, do they? People say, oh yeah, we are all very well behaved and we all get on so well, blah, blah, blah. And then as you lift the lid on that family, you'll see all these sort of awful little psychological patterns going on. So the 8th house really shows where this exists, I think, in your chart. And then if you think of the sign of Scorpio, the sign of Scorpio, it does get really maligned in astrology because it's almost seen as, I've described Pluto as Darth Vader in a few videos. Scorpio is seen as the Darth Vader of the zodiac, because in many ways, Scorpio is actually prepared to dive into all the things that a lot of us won't even consider doing. Not to make Scorpio bad necessarily, but you could say that Scorpio is very curious to find out and curious to go into the darkness in a way that a lot of people aren't. And I don't think you can really set yourself free until you can really see the whole map or the territory of where we are. And if any of you are trained in NLP, you'll know that I am too, because I've just said the map and the territory, because that's a premise of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. It's the map is not the territory, but in our lives we have these internal maps of how things all fit together and how things work. And we think that that is what life is, when in actual fact, the map is just something that we've created, and really there's so much more to life than there really is. And Scorpios will investigate what is out there, and it might take them down some dark paths, and it might take them to places they're not comfortable in, but at least then they know that they don't like it. And so that's one of the best things I think about polarity and being in this place of duality where there's right and wrong, good and bad and all that jazz, is we get to see what we don't want, and then we can move towards what we do. So the 8th house is complex, suffice to say. I also think it's a place of rites of passage, so it describes our evolution. So birth through to death and reincarnation, we go through several stages within our life. Very much like, when you've got an embryo, it turns into a fetus, turns into a baby, and there are definite signs of development. And sure enough, I've got 3 children under the age of 11 and under, and I'm seeing them all at very distinct stages. I've got one of them that's just coming out of toddlerhood, no longer a baby, is walking, talking, very much a toddler, but almost a little boy. I've got a girl who's she's about 7.5 at the moment. I'm recording this in 2003, and she's hitting that sort of 7-year, 8-year phenomenon where kids all of a sudden want to come out of the home a bit more, and they're suddenly interested in everything outside of themselves, which is one of the sort of psychological stages that psychologists might speak of. And then I've got another child, that our eldest, who is really starting to show signs of puberty. So there are these little growth development spurts and rites of passage that we go through. And you might just say rites of passage could be, on one hand, becoming a genetic creator yourself, i.e. going through the puberty process and becoming fertile. That's definitely a rite of passage, isn't it? You might say leaving school, you might say owning a house, you might say meeting a partner, you might say having a child yourself, and it goes on and on and on. And I think the 8th house really shows our reactions to these rites of passage. So if we tie, and it's also a place of psychic interference and psychic ability, because there's so many unspoken, unseen elements of all of these things that I speak of. You know, it's kind of like a feeling, an intuition, a knowing. It's not, this isn't a place of rationality. It really isn't. And so if we start to now weave in how Pluto fits in this, we get a much bigger picture. So first of all, I'm going to look at what it's like to have Pluto in the 8th house, and then I'm going to move on, you know, to talk of what happens when Pluto is actually transiting through your 8th house. So just to kind of put it into the greater story of the zodiac or the houses, if we imagine that the latest lesson that Pluto has learnt in the 7th is about finding our own power in spite of having powerful people around us. You know, it's a place where we realise and finally own the power that we might have to be an individual. And then as we're moving into the 8th, we're really talking about how to use that power responsibly. So Pluto seeks power, and it also shows us what we're afraid of. Like really afraid of, so much so that we try to control situations. So either way, there's power. You either want the power for what power gives you, or you're wanting the power so that you don't feel as vulnerable. So where do you seek power then if you've got Pluto in the 8th? Well, there's like on one level, you might say you seek the power to be in the know, to be in the thick of things, to be in the thick of the secrets, to be in the thick of the family karma, the family money, the powerful investments. You know, you may well be caught in the drama of your family. You may well have a very dramatic family, in fact, with a Pluto in the 8th. It could really show that your family matrix, your family makeup, or your family's wealth is complicated. You may be in a family that has got, and it's more likely than not now, you may well have a family that's got lots of little family subsets, like there's a greater family system going on. You might be part of the first family, or you might be part of the third family, and you know, or the second, you know, and who knows, there could be like lots and lots of little family systems, and you know, that could show that you're in the thick of it and kind of playing in one family and in another, and you might see it as inclusivity, and other people might look at you and think, oh look, yeah, she's got all the power, or he's got all the power. So there is this kind of sense of drama in the 8th. And if you think of the sign of Scorpio, it's fair to say it's pretty dramatic at times. You may well find that there is a lot of family money, or there's a lot of family money issues, you know, like family financial curses or tax issues and things like that, or that people don't deal with the rites of passage in a very easy way. You know, they're trying to control that you don't grow up, or trying to control that you don't ever reproduce, or, you know, at the other end of the spectrum, you know, as you start to, you know, this is for women, by the way, not so much for the men, but, you know, as you're hitting that stage where you may no longer be fertile, you might be trying to stop time, like control the passage of time, as opposed to find power in the rites of passage that you're going through. So there's a lot of fear of that change. You know, as I said at the start, Pluto is all about transformation, but if you fear change, that's going to, like, you're going to try and stop change from happening. That's big. Now, if the theme of secrets and blame, shame, guilt and anger come up in your family matrix, then you might find that living under the expectations of others has created a guilt-ridden, you know, existence. You may well say sorry a lot, and you might run on guilt, and it might not even be expressed guilt. It might just be implied guilt, that you're through implication, if someone asks for your help but does it in that certain way that you know that if you don't do it, you'll be paying for it later in some way. This is, and of itself, a transforming kind of aspect, because your survival is based on transforming, either norming to what's been asked of you, even if it's not done in a very obvious way or honest or transparent way, but you may well end up needing to transform that feeling of being psychologically damaged or psychologically repressed. And of course, you may also get power from just maintaining the family cultural weirdness, you know, and the psychology. You may well decide to endorse it rather than heal from it. And they're both okay. You know, there are no absolute right or wrongs necessarily. But it's more about how you deal with the psychology of it. You could really strike gold here. Like if you're prepared to do anything to get all the money or power within your family, this placement could in fact lead you to massive wealth, but you'd need to go to places that other members of your family might not be prepared to go. You might be the one that is prepared to work 60-hour weeks and maybe do deals with people that maybe other people wouldn't. You know, you might be prepared, you might feel strong enough to carry the heavy weight of your family karma on your shoulders. You know, and obviously I'm not willingly advocating that you do anything nefarious, but I'm certainly not judging you for it, put it that way. I just, you know, I'm not going to say, do something terrible, because, you know, it's not my thing. But, you know, most likely if you've got Pluto in the 8th, you'll be pulled through association into some place where you're unwilling or deeply uncomfortable to go to. You know, it would be a place where it's almost like a rite of passage. Where are your boundaries? Where are you going to stop? Are you going to step into the underworld or not? So yeah, like I said, guilt, shame, blame and anger and regret are the holders of these patterns in the family, like they're markers. And do you end up using them to control others, or are others using them to control you? The most important thing is just being able to observe what's going on and observe your part in it, and kind of to just forgive yourself. You know, you know, we are born into these families, we're born into these patterns, and our only responsibility is really to ourselves and to understand what is it that we need to transform here, or what do we need to forgive and accept. So yeah, it's suffice to say, psychological mastery and mystery is absolutely rife with this placement. So what do you really fear? I think you probably fear being wrong, being the cause of all the badness in the family, being scapegoated, being blamed, being cast out, being cut off. What do you really need to learn? Probably to allow the light in more, you know, to come up for air, to learn from the darkness and the thickness of it all, and to allow that it's okay to have some light and some ease. Many of us born with these kinds of patterns don't even realise that there is a choice. And that might be the first chink of light, is to realise that what you're born into doesn't necessarily mean that you have no choice. Sure, your choice might be really dire. You know, like if you choose to act against the family, you're done. But you still have a choice. And knowing that you always have a choice as to where to put your attention is the key thing. So I would say what you're really learning in this is to allow the light in, and to allow the love in, and to realise, you know, like when someone, a lot of parents, and if you look at Western world parents and you listen to some of the crap they come out with, and they've learned it from, you know, the previous generation and the generation before that, and so on and so forth. And I guess they do that in Eastern traditions as well. I'm not so familiar with those, but you'll hear things like, "We're doing it because it will help you. This is for the good of you. If you do this, blah blah." And there's all these ideas and expectations, and there's like seeds of guilt thrown into everything. And so it's really difficult to see. But like what is causing you pain is, I think, people seeing that you can see outside of the drama, and they may not. So for instance, if you've got parents or people around you within your family matrix using language that they've used because they've learnt it from other people, and they've learnt it and they've learnt it, they may not even see the drama that they're helping to perpetuate and create. You might just be the first generation within your family matrix that sees this and chooses to step outside of this. So you may be cast out because their inability to see is a big thing. And this could be really heartbreaking and huge for you. So it's massive what's going on in the 8th house. Pluto in the 8th house is huge. And of course, you could just choose to keep that pattern going and get even better at it. It's entirely your choice. How you find freedom, I think, is to realise you're not really your family. You're not really your inherited story. You're not really the inherited wealth. You're not really the inherited debt. You're not really the inherited secrets. You're not a part of those secrets necessarily. You might be born of a secret, but you're not necessarily the cause of it. And so it's really seeing that, yes, you are powerful, which you've learned. Like if we look at the life cycle of Pluto through the signs, in the 7th, we are learning that we are powerful in spite of other people. And in the 8th, we're called to put that into practice. So yeah, it's big. Now, if your Pluto is well connected to the other planets in your chart, you might find that you've got the strength to overcome your family or your inheritance or the system that you're born into. And you can have really strong psychic impulses and knowing. So that intuition, that instinct comes back and you're able to see through the veils of illusion. And you can have real great power in sharing what you learn, because obviously that whole process is deeply transforming. With squares and oppositions, it's difficult for you to move beyond the veiled reality that you see. It's not to say you won't, but you might only be able to do like one rite of passage at a time, or clear up or infuse some light into one thing at a time. It's really important though that you hold on to your mental clarity and morality, whatever it is, whatever it is that you've gained for yourself, you must hold on to it, and don't let other people use guilt, shame, blame and anger to cheat you out of it. And they won't even know they're doing it, by the way, but so yeah, it's a huge placement. And if you think it'd be useful to unpack it more in a little study group, then just please do get in touch. It's louisatannermunson at gmail.com, and I can arrange some study groups. So if you've got Pluto transiting through your 8th house right now, what's needed to be understood and seen that you can't yet see, I would say right now there's a whole new way of being where the old stuff from childhood comes up, the old patterns of blame, shame, regret, anger, and can I say guilt galore? You know, it's like, you know, you might be asking yourself, am I a guilt thrower or a catcher? Because there are definite patterns to guilt. You know, there's a thrower and there's always someone there to catch it. And if there isn't someone to catch it, the thrower won't even throw guilt. So that's interesting just to think about. You may find you're on both sides of it. And if you've got Pluto going through the 8th, you're needing to survive and thrive. And yet it feels like something is keeping you in your place, like it's almost stopping you from going through your next rite of passage. But it is time to grow beyond it. It is time to allow yourself to grow. It can also show control issues to do with the family jewels and secrets. So, for instance, you may well find it coincides with the death of somebody really big in your family who holds everything in place. And so a bit like the drama that can ensue with resolving inheritances, there's also the moving out and beyond the guilt games played by that person. So for instance, when someone passes away, psychically, all of the control mechanisms that were put in place, that were held in place by the sheer force of that person's life energy, all of those games and mechanisms can be broken down and sort of composted, which is very much the whole cycle of life. You know, we rise up, we get stronger, we become fertile, we spread our seeds, we start to die back, we start to die and decay, and then we finally do die. And then our body crumples and becomes compost. And then out of that, you know, compost, you know, more life comes up. So, you know, we're part of this flow of life. And, you know, with Pluto going through your 8th house at the moment, you're absolutely feeling all of that. What is your big learning here if you've got Pluto going through your 8th? I would just say it's forgiveness, that you can and need to forgive the sides of you that have been caught in the dark. Like, we all have a darkness somewhere. We all have darkness captured in so many different places. And there's probably judgments based on other people's expectations where you've been blamed and shamed and you've been judging yourself really poorly and harshly. And now is the time to let that go. Now is the time to bring it into the light of day, the light of consciousness, and forgive it. So you can notice what you want to transform, and you can allow yourself, using your deep intuition, to rise up like that phoenix from the ashes. So there you go. That's my thoughts about Pluto going through the 8th, or in the 8th at birth. Obviously, the Pluto story continues, because after Pluto transits the 8th, it goes into the 9th, and then there's a whole new flavour of Pluto, and maybe I'll see you in one of those episodes. But thank you so much for joining me here today, and I hope it's been useful. And like I said earlier, if I can be of any help, then just drop me a line. It's louisatannermunson at gmail.com, and you can also reach me by my website, www.feelgoodastrology.com. Lots of love. Bye for now.
You've been listening to the Feel Good Astrology podcast with Louisa Tanner-Munson. To request your personal reading, go to feelgoodastrology.com.